You know, we asked for FBI files on UFO sightings from 1947 and 1950.
Right.
And wow, these reports, they
Yeah.
really pull you in.
He did.
It's like we're all detectives trying to unravel this big mystery.
Absolutely.
But to get anywhere with this, we need to start with the right questions.
I agree.
And one thing that jumps out at me is that these aren't just some blurry photos or stories people told.
Yeah.
We have teletypes, memos, letters.
Right.
It's all official documentation. And it shows how people back then, how they reacted to these unexplained events.
That's exactly what makes this so compelling.
Okay, so we've got sightings from all over the U.S., but a lot of them, if you look closely, they seem to be clustered near military bases.
Oh, that's interesting.
And testing grounds.
You know what? That's a really good observation.
Well,
and don't forget, this is right at the start of the Cold War.
Right.
Tensions were high. Everyone was suspicious of other countries.
Especially the Soviets. I can see why people might have thought that these objects could be some kind of Soviet threat.
Makes sense.
Maybe even some new technology they were testing.
That's a good point.
Can you imagine the fear back then?
Oh, I know.
The world had just seen the atomic bomb.
Right.
And then suddenly, there are these things in the sky.
Unidentified objects.
Nobody knew what they were.
It's a recipe for anxiety and speculation.
And we can see that in the reports. Like that one from Portland, Oregon.
Yes, Portland.
Yeah, where a bunch of police officers saw this bright, silvery object. And they said it changed shape as it moved.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's one of the ones that really makes you think.
It does.
What could explain that?
Right.
Were they just misinterpreting something they saw? Or was it something truly beyond what we understood back then?
It's hard to know.
Well, you have to remember that radar technology, it was brand new back then.
Right.
So it's much easier to mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, things like weather balloons or experimental aircraft.
I guess so.
For something extraordinary.
That's a good point.
You know, one that I found really fascinating was the report from Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, yeah, I read that one.
Where the witness said the object was moving much faster than any plane.
Like way faster.
Much faster.
And he was comparing it to the speed of a regular plane.
Right.
So if it wasn't a plane, then what was it?
Exactly.
What could travel that fast back in the late 40s, early 50s?
That's where the limitations of the technology back then become so important.
I see what you mean.
You know, we're talking about a time when what we know now as common technology just didn't exist.
Okay, so then we have this dentist from Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote to the FBI.
He did?
About something he heard at a Red Cross dinner.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Apparently someone told him that these saucers, they were actually from Spain.
From Spain?
Yeah. Huh. And that the government was covering it all up.
Okay. I have to ask.
Yeah.
Why Spain?
All right.
Out of all the possibilities.
Well, think about it.
Oh.
This was just a few years after the Spanish Civil War.
Right.
That was a really divisive conflict.
It was.
And it had global consequences. So maybe people were still distrustful of Spain.
Okay, yeah.
And then you combine that with the Cold War anxieties. It's not hard to see how someone might come up with a theory about Spanish involvement.
It's like all these anxieties are feeding into each other.
Exactly.
People were looking for an explanation.
They needed to make sense of it.
And sometimes those explanations were shaped by the fears of that time.
It's amazing how these historical events,
I know,
they all connect in unexpected ways.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk more about how the public reacted to all of this.
Sounds good. You know what's really striking?
What's that?
These documents show us a public that was trying to understand something they couldn't explain.
They were searching for answers.
They were reaching out to newspapers, writing to the FBI, coming up with their own theories.
It's like they were crowdsourcing an explanation for UFOs before the internet even existed. That's a great way to put it.
And some of these theories were pretty wild.
Oh, bet. Like what?
Where there was this one letter to the FBI.
Okay.
Where someone suggested that a flying saucer sighting was actually a fuel tank.
A fuel tank?
Yeah, for atomic bombs.
Wow, that's interesting.
Right?
I hadn't thought about that before.
It's a unique connection.
Is that the only instance of someone linking UFOs and nuclear fears?
Well, that specific theory seems to be isolated.
Okay.
But you can definitely see that fear of nuclear war. It shows up in a lot of the reports.
Makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
the atomic age and UFOs, they kind of became intertwined.
In the public imagination.
For sure. And then you have the Louisville Times publishing those photos.
Oh, yeah.
Of a supposed flying saucer.
That really captured people's attention.
It did.
Even Walter Winchell was talking about it.
Really?
He was one of the biggest radio personalities at the time.
So it was a big deal, B.
Oh, yeah. That's how you know it had gone mainstream.
I guess when Walter Winchell's talking about it, it's officially a phenomenon.
It makes you wonder about the media's role
in all of this.
in shaping how people saw UFOs.
Right. Did the coverage create more interest?
It's hard to say.
Or was it just reflecting what people were already thinking?
It's like a chicken and egg situation.
Totally.
But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
The media was a huge part of spreading these stories.
Okay, so we've got the public totally captivated by UFOs.
Yeah.
Theories everywhere.
Right.
How does the FBI respond to all this?
Well, you might be surprised,
Oh.
but they weren't really actively investigating these cases.
So it wasn't like the X-Files.
Not quite.
We're like filing cabinets.
You could say that.
So what were they doing?
Mostly collecting information and passing it on.
Like to who?
We see a lot of memos where they're forwarding reports to the Air Force.
Interesting.
Or other agencies.
Passing the buck.
In a way, yes.
Did they ever take any of these reports seriously?
They were very thorough about documenting everything.
Okay.
But they often approached these reports with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Can't blame them. Some of those stories were pretty out there.
Exactly.
Were there any times when their skepticism was really obvious?
There were definitely cases where the agents suspected witnesses of exaggerating.
I can see that.
Or maybe even experiencing some kind of mental instability.
Yeah. I mean, we have to remember...
Yeah, the context
of the Cold War.
Right.
It probably affected how some people saw things.
Fear can make you see things that aren't there.
Absolutely.
You know what I find really interesting?
What's that?
The difference in tone between the public and the FBI.
I see what you mean.
The public's all anxious and worried.
Yeah.
But the FBI is so restrained.
Right. Almost bureaucratic.
They're speaking different languages.
Totally. For example, in their responses to people, they're very polite, thanking them for the report, but then emphasizing that the FBI can't really do anything.
Like it's not their jurisdiction.
Exactly.
A lot of, thanks for your concern, but this isn't really our problem.
Yeah, basically.
I think it shows how the government was trying to balance things.
What do you mean?
They had to acknowledge public concern.
Right.
But at the same time, they didn't want to cause panic.
Or give legitimacy to claims that weren't true.
Exactly.
But by being so cautious, did they actually end up creating more suspicion?
Oh, that's a really good point.
Like if the FBI isn't taking it seriously, maybe there's something they're hiding.
Right. It feeds into that whole idea of government cover-up.
Exactly. What if they had been more open about it?
Yeah.
Even if they didn't have all the answers?
I think that would have made a difference.
Maybe people wouldn't have been so quick to jump to conclusions.
Transparency versus control.
That's the big question.
It always seems to come up.
When we're talking about the government and the unexplained.
And it's still relevant today.
With all the renewed interest in UFOs.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we could talk about this for hours.
I know, right?
But let's try to sum up what we've learned.
Okay.
We started with this question. What were people seeing back in 47 and 50?
In those skies.
And what we found is this mix of personal stories.
Right.
Cold War anxieties.
Absolutely.
People trying to make sense of something they didn't understand.
Something completely unknown.
We saw sightings near military bases.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Which made people think about advanced technology and possible threats.
And we talked about the theories people came up with.
Soviet spies, Spanish saucers.
Even fuel tanks for atomic bombs.
It's amazing the things people imagined.
I know.
And then you have the media, newspapers and radio.
Spreading the word.
Bringing those stories to the whole country.
And of course, we can't forget the FBI.
Trying to keep up with it all.
They were caught in the middle.
Between a public that was fascinated. And their own need to stay calm and collected.
They documented everything.
Sent reports to other agencies.
And tried not to get too caught up in the hype.
But they never actually said that none of it was real.
That's important.
They walked this fine line.
Acknowledging the public's worries.
But also trying to maintain control.
To keep things from spiraling out of control.
And I think that's what makes these files so fascinating.
Yeah.
They give us a look at a time when the world was changing.
So much uncertainty.
New technologies, global tensions.
And the possibility that something truly unknown was out there.
A story that continues to captivate us today.
Absolutely.
So we leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What does our fascination with UFOs tell us about ourselves?
It's a question worth pondering.
Are we looking for answers?
Are we drawn to the mystery?
Or is it something deeper?
A reflection of our own anxieties about the world.
We encourage you to explore these files for yourselves.
Draw your own conclusions.
And until next time, keep looking up essential facts.